Hello, my name is Shane Enetz. I'm an associate professor of finance at the Kroll School of Business. Today, I'm going to be walking you through the genealogy of my discipline, finance. And I'm going to be doing it a little bit different. I'm going to be doing a storyboard largely through doodling, and I'm going to kind of show you through picture how my discipline has developed and evolved over time. So let's get started. In the beginning of my discipline, there are resources and there are people. And really, the resources that you find in the trees, in nature, is what constitutes wealth. And the wealth was distributed by really proximity. Who is closest to those resources? Who has the power? And so you have the haves and the have-nots. And so we have a concept, and I'm going to kind of start in the Greek time period. I'm going to use a Greek word here of oikonomia. And so culture really said that just in general, there's an abundance of resources, but there's not an abundance of distribution. And so let's create a law. So nomia means law, and then oik means home. And it just says that the home's going to generate a natural surplus for some households, but not for others. And let's create a law for how that surplus should be distributed. And so Aristotle was one of the first, as well as Xenophon, who were Greek philosophers, and they thought about how should the haves, how should they distribute their surplus? And they really said, it should be a matter of virtue. It should be a matter of common good. And so then they tried to argue about what is common good. And as you distribute the surplus, let's kind of think about what's virtuous for man. And then really things evolved. So we kind of moved forward. Rome kind of took over, and there was such a consolidation of power that resources really were able to become money. So resources became money. You had the denarii that was able to kind of have Caesar's face on it. And then once resources became money, that was the birth of my field of finance. And so the moment finance was birthed was the moment that we had the ability to do a lot more in terms of our what we can do with resources, but at a cost. And so I'm going to kind of show what happened. So let's go ahead and kind of fast forward to the Middle Ages. And we have our same resource tree here. And this resource tree has some resources that have landed on the same landowner, lord who has them. But because the resources have been switched to currency, to money, they're now able to create some institutions. There's enough stability that you have something, and banking was a bit informal before, but now it became kind of an official bank. And when banking became pretty solid to where everything was stable, that's when you really started to create a formal marketplace. So you started getting these institutions, financial institutions and marketplace institutions, and that really started to kind of rev up what you could do with resources. And so this landowner, he or she would send out deposits to the bank. Then the bank would send out loans. And then with that, the kind of individual that was kind of sitting here, the have-not, he was able to go down and begin getting more formal labor. And so he's kind of in the tree now working to get more resources, but he's no longer, he never had any kind of position of power, but it's a little bit better maybe that he's a laborer, and the marketplace itself is going to now kind of take care of his wages. Before, it was all the responsibility of the haves to take care of wages, but now there's an institution that's going to help kind of provide for wages. And really, during this time period of the Middle Ages, you had this rise of a marketplace that started having power, but the power really was still with the landlords, the very few. And so the oikonomia evolved from just virtue to the church. So the church kind of became, and I'm going to focus kind of on the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church became the source of who would determine how to distribute the surplus. So the landlord still had the surplus, and the Catholic churches would figure out what to do. And Thomas Aquinas, he was a big voice. And he had this voice about common good and the church really being responsible for determining what was common good. And so a landlord, if they were God-fearing, would look to the church as to how to distribute, how to do deposits, how to be able to think about his surplus. So that was kind of the oikonomia of that time. Fast forward a little bit, we're getting to the kind of the beginning of Enlightenment and kind of like an energy of invention. And there are two big inventions that really helped spark a huge revolution in finance. The first was what's called double entry journal accounting. And the idea of double entry journal accounting is you have a T account that really helped organize financial transactions. But the other one was something called an LLC. And LLC, many scholars and academics have said, is probably the single greatest invention of human history. And so if we're looking at our tree here, with these two inventions in place, what ended up happening is you have the laborer, you have the owner, and their roles start to kind of get less and less hierarchical because the business becomes its own tax-paying entity. So the business is now an LLC, which means it's separate of the owner. It's actually its own person. And then the bank also becomes an institution that's less connected to the person. And so then you have the bank also becomes what's called an investment bank and gets a little more specialized in creating the LLC. And basically, once you disconnected the business from the owner, then you are creating limited liability. And so the masses now are kind of free to invest in this business because the LLC can issue shares and anyone can buy these shares. And so it's a bit of democratization of the marketplace. And that created a lot of excitement. And so you have still the resources here and the business with the resources, but the loans now, instead of it just being the owner that was doing deposits, the laborer can buy shares. So now they're just going to buy shares of a business. And now people all over the world can buy shares. And so all of this money is getting funneled into an investment bank. And then the investment bank is acting as an intermediary to then give that money over to the business. And so you have this situation where now a business has access to incredible amount of capital. And so good business ideas are able to get funded. And really the first great business idea that was funded was the Dutch East Indies Company. And when, the English people, and, it was mostly wealthy still at this time, but quite a bit of, marketplace laborers were able to kind of buy shares in the Dutch East Indies Company, and it doubled, it tripled, it quadrupled, and people were made wealthy quickly. And so you had an incredible situation where more goods and services were being made, and the LLC really, it opened up quite a bit of hope for what could be possible. And they say most great inventions were from the invention of the LLC, including electricity, and the computer, and cars, and that's my car, and the internet, and the list goes on. And during this time, Luther and Calvin and the whole Reformation were really getting going, and they had seen the abuses of the Catholic Church. And so the oikonomia started to evolve. More people were getting money. There was less kind of hierarchy. The landlords the power was getting broken up. And so there was this great hope that the way you should think about distributing money should be, the virtue was in a work ethic. And so the work ethic, the Protestant work ethic was kind of if you worked hard, did well, then you were going to virtuously think about distributing your surplus that you got from these great inventions. And so the oikonomia kind of evolved to our work ethic being the common good, and then the church was no longer had a voice. People stopped looking to the church to figure out what should you do with money. Instead, they started looking towards their own work ethic, their own individual kind of ethos, and that really, the Reformation and particularly Calvin, academics have argued, really launched modern capitalism. It helped equip and give the right ideas, the right social imaginary for modern capitalism. And so as we kind of fast forward, we get towards a world where we have this was such a good thing. People made so much money by creating LLCs, issuing shares, that they just said, we want more of this. And so then a system was created, more intermediaries, more institutions were created to help distribute this situation. So we have the owner and the laborer are much more closely connected, and they're kind of loosely now investors. And we have the LLC, and more LLCs are being formed. We have more and more important roles for the banks to help facilitate this process. And now we introduce a new institution called, I'm going to call it the stock market, which had brokers and it had traders. And really what this meant is it meant that it wasn't just the Dutch East Indies Company, it was going to be a whole lot of other companies. And so the investors then, they funneled all of their money to the stock markets, and then the stock markets funneled their money to the investment banks, and the investment banks funneled their money. And really, I could probably switch this to say it goes first to the bank, then the stock market. But the real point here is that a new intermediary was introduced, and that's what this did, was it helped create kind of like much more developed markets. And so you can involve much more types of investors. And the big thought leader during this time was Adam Smith. And so Adam Smith, he really said, all right, this whole process, we need to not get in the way of this process. So we need to recognize that this process is now moving so well that it's acting in invisible hands. And he coined that term to say there's this hand moving and it's all governed by self-interest, and this is Enlightenment time. And so people had a high view of self, and they said, all right, if you could just allow people to do what they want to do, then the greatest surplus would be possible. And so virtue really was about following your heart, following self-interest. And this was a deist. Most of these folks who were helping develop these ideas were deists, and they just had this view that God made people and then left, and he made them really well. And so we need to just kind of think about our natural way of thinking about things, and that'll help us out. So self-interest is really going to be the best way for us to live our life. And then, so much more things were invented, penicillin and and we just go with electricity and with computers and with internets, that were just like, let's do more inventions, more productivity. And so then we have a situation where in order to do more, we need to add more intermediaries. We need to add more institutions. And so we have our investors, and these investors now are going to, because they want more of this, we can't just kind of have the stock market. We need to introduce, and the brokers, we need to introduce more institutions, more middlemen, more intermediaries. And so our new intermediary we're going to introduce is financial professionals, like portfolio managers and financial products, like mutual funds and ETFs and derivatives These are all, mortgages and all sorts of variations of mortgages. And these are all innovations that require institutions and people to help facilitate. And then you also need the stock markets to help facilitate that and all the people involved in creating big markets. And so with all of these new institutions, then money is kind of flowing through a lot of hands. And then you have your bank still. And the bank's role is becoming bigger and bigger as we get bigger and bigger with finance. And it eventually makes its way over to the businesses. And the businesses eventually pay it out to the investors. So trying to show the flow of the money. Each time it goes through an intermediary, there's less of it. And then it goes back to the investors as dividends. And really, what helped facilitate all of these financial professionals, financial products, was some theory. Modern portfolio theory really helps justify the idea. Before modern portfolio theory, and this was done by Markowitz, and he helped show that you could, if people didn't want to buy individual stocks who were just normal people, only businesses did that. But with the advent of this theory, as long as you owned a portfolio of individual stocks, it kind of helps reduce the risk. So it gave full green light to people owning stocks. And then if they owned a few stocks, then they said, well, we want to own lots of stocks. And then that was where the mutual fund got created in the early 1900s. And then the index fund, and then the ETF. And all of these inventions just helped really expand out the production of goods and services, really helps businesses get capital, access to capital. It helped really fund, good ideas got funded quicker. But hopefully you can see that there's been a loss. There's been a loss in this evolution. And this kind of brings us to where we are today. So kind of here's where we are today. We have this world where the investors are funneling money, and we have lots of institutions that end up giving it to the businesses. And one kind of downside is the laborer is kind of invisible now. So you can think of the laborer as behind the scenes, and you really don't see them. And it's usually outside labor that's cheap. And before, the investor was highly connected to the business operations, but now they're separated by many, many institutions. And the labor also was a little more connected to the owner and the bank, but there's just lots of levels of disconnection. And since the business is a person and is disconnected from everything, they can justify having outside labor they don't know, and they can even justify having foreign outside labor that they don't know. And so just get farther and farther away. So you just get a lot more distance with this evolution. And, one thing I'd like to just as I close, show is Genesis 2:15. It said, us as Christians, when God created creation, he said, hey, I want you to work and watch over this land. And finance, what I love about finance is it works the land really well. Through all of these creations, all of this innovation, really this fruit gets just distributed like crazy, and inventions happen like crazy. Good ideas get funded lightning speed. And so we're working the land really well, but the problem is we're not watching it. So because there's been so much separation, there's not a lot of watching of the land happening. And so what you found is, some studies have shown that over half of the S&P 500, the top 500 companies in the country. So if you're to take the top 500 companies, over half of them are engaged in activities and behaviors that would be considered unbiblical, such as funding, abortion clinics, or funding pornography, or doing all sorts of other things that a Christian would clearly not want to do. And so, does this mean finance is bad? I'll leave that to your discussion. But I love the working and what it's done, but I don't like that we are not watching over as well, and we're not able to watch over as well. So thank you so much, and I hope this was helpful.